The Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality Solid and Hazardous Waste Division. Solid Waste Guideline Number 10, Waste Screening. The purpose of this training is to provide landfill owners/operators, managers, and attendants with guidance in the following areas. 1. Instituting a waste screening program. 2. Properly identifying hazardous waste. 3. Evaluating waste disposal requests. And 4. Providing management guidelines for typical Wyoming wastes which may be prohibited at a landfill. Landfill operators may impose more stringent criteria than those found in this training. The information in this training is also found on the Department's Solid Waste Guideline Number 10, Waste Screening. After you have completed watching the training, you are required to also keep a record of your training at your landfill. A waste screening program must be capable of preventing the disposal of wastes which are prohibited at a sanitary landfill. Programs should be tailored to an individual landfill, considering the types and quantities of prohibited wastes which may be present within a facility's service area. One of the best and easiest ways of screening prohibited waste is to educate the public on the proper use of the facility. Articles or advertisements in local newspapers, radio ads, or inserts in utility bills can be used to inform the public regarding the types of waste that are and are not acceptable, and to offer alternative management methods for prohibited wastes. A list of potential hazardous waste generators within a landfill service area can be obtained from the department. Notifications can then be sent to each business, including information about state and federal hazardous waste requirements, what wastes are acceptable for disposal, and the local landfill rules and requirements for management of prohibited wastes. Face-to-face meetings with known or suspected hazardous waste generators within the landfill service area may also be useful. When conducted at the generator's place of business, these meetings allow the landfill operator to become familiar with the specific waste streams which may be delivered to the landfill. These types of meetings or audits provide an excellent opportunity to exchange information and concerns regarding specific waste management activities. This is an example of a list of hazardous waste generators within a landfill service area. Another way to prohibit the dumping of prohibited waste is to limit operating hours and to have access restrictions. Illegal dumping of prohibited waste is less likely to occur in broad daylight than under cover of darkness. Operating hours can be limited to certain hours of the day or certain days of the week, or both. This approach is only practical when used in conjunction with access restrictions. A secure perimeter fence and locking access gate can prohibit illegal access and dumping of prohibited waste at obscure times of the day or night. An effective method for screening prohibited waste is to randomly inspect incoming loads. These inspections can be made near the facility gate or at the working face and should be conducted on an asphalt, concrete, or plastic lined pad. If these inspections are conducted on the bare ground, any prohibited waste which are present could spill and contaminate the soil or groundwater. In order for this approach to be used, inspectors must be trained in the proper use of and provided with appropriate personal protective equipment. Inspectors must also be trained to be able to recognize prohibited waste. The department strongly recommends that photographs be taken to document random inspection activities. Inspections of incoming loads can be accomplished at sites which are normally unattended by having inspectors present on a random basis. For a random inspection program to be effective, the department recommends that at least 1% of all incoming loads, roughly 1 out of every 100 vehicles, should be inspected randomly. This is an example of a waste screening pad construction. Record keeping is an important part of any waste screening program. Records of all waste screening activities must be maintained through the active life of the facility and the entire post-closure period. A critical scenario to prepare for when developing any waste screening program is what will occur if a prohibited waste is identified at the landfill. Will the landfill personnel make arrangements to properly manage the waste, or will the waste be rejected? If a prohibited waste is identified and rejected at the landfill, chances are that the generator will attempt to sneak it back into your landfill or another landfill, or dispose of it somewhere illegally and potentially place the public, livestock, wildlife, or environment at risk. However, if a landfill owner-operator chooses to take responsibility for making sure that any prohibited waste which is identified will be properly managed, a contingency fund will be necessary to cover the associated costs. Under this scenario, it would be prudent to inform all landfill users that they will be charged for any costs which are incurred as a result of properly managing these wastes. Signs at the facility gate and other public education efforts are very useful in making sure that all landfill users are aware of the fact that a waste screening program is in place and the implications of delivering prohibited waste to the landfill. Identification of hazardous waste. The most likely source of prohibited waste are businesses which generate regulated hazardous waste. There are two basic categories of hazardous waste: listed and characteristic. Some examples of listed wastes are contained in the guideline. Characteristic wastes are regulated as hazardous because of the chemical characteristics, corrosive, ignitable, toxic, or reactive, which they exhibit. Hazardous waste generators are classified by the amount of hazardous waste they generate in a calendar month. If a business generates more than 100 kilograms of hazardous waste in a single month, it is classified as a small or large quantity generator and must manifest its waste to a permitted hazardous waste treatment, storage, or disposal facility. If a business generates less than 100 kilograms in a calendar month, it is classified as a conditionally exempt small quantity generator, or CESQG. A good rule of thumb is 100 kilograms equal 220 pounds, or roughly 1/2 of a 55-gallon drum if using the weight of water. CESQGs may dispose of their hazardous waste at a sanitary landfill if they obtain written authorization from the landfill operator or the department. In order to obtain authorization, a written request should be submitted. Even if the request by the CESQG is approved, it may be prudent to impose additional treatment, containerization, or handling requirements to protect landfill personnel and the public, and to ensure that the waste is safely disposed. Small quantities of hazardous waste which are generated by households are exempt from state and federal hazardous waste regulations, and they may be disposed in any permitted sanitary landfill. However, just because these wastes are exempt from regulation does not mean that they cannot pose significant hazards. Special screening, handling, and disposal procedures may be appropriate for some types of household hazardous waste. Evaluating waste disposal requests. Individual requests to dispose specific waste should be submitted in writing and evaluated by the designated solid waste landfill manager. All requests to dispose of unusual or potentially hazardous waste should contain the following information: name, address, and phone number of the generator, location at which the waste was generated, if different than that of the generator, conditions under which the waste was generated, date of generation, particular process which generated it, conditions of spills, outdated or contaminated product, etc., the quantity and physical condition of the waste, and the laboratory analysis for hazardous waste characteristics. If a waste is suspected to be hazardous, the generator is required to properly sample the waste and have it analyzed using appropriate laboratory procedures. The results of the laboratory testing should be reviewed by the solid waste landfill manager using this guideline. If a particular waste does not meet any of the hazardous waste criteria we just discussed, and it is not prohibited, that we'll discuss later here, the solid waste landfill manager may authorize the treatment or disposal of the waste without obtaining authorization from the department. However, the manager must retain a copy of the disposal request and any associated laboratory data. These records must be maintained throughout the active life of the facility and the entire post-closure period. If a particular waste meets any of the hazardous waste criteria we discussed previously, the solid waste landfill manager should immediately notify the department. Solid waste landfill managers should also feel free to call the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division staff for additional assistance and guidance in evaluating unusual waste disposal requests. Specific waste management guidelines for typical Wyoming wastes. The following wastes and associated management options have been reviewed and approved by the Department for use at landfills in Wyoming. Management options are qualified by what should be done, or recommended, and what must be done, which is required. Prohibited acts are qualified by the phrase may not. Many management options recommend that a particular waste should be disposed in a separate area or the dead animal trench. If these special areas or trenches are not available, these wastes may be managed in the main trench at the working face. Lead-acid batteries. Lead-acid batteries should be stockpiled for recycling in an upright, non-leaking position, no more than 2 batteries high, on a pellet, plastic liner recommended. Storage of more than 1,200 batteries must be permitted by the department. Lead-acid batteries may not be disposed in a landfill. Used oil. Used oil may be accepted from do-it-yourself oil changers for recycling or energy recovery, burning in a space heater. Used oil should not be accepted from local businesses. Oil storage should occur in an approved and labeled barrel or tank with berms and a liner such as plastic, concrete, or asphalt. Storage of more than 500 gallons of waste oil must be permitted by the department. Used oil may not be disposed in a landfill. All used oil containers must be properly labeled, and there are specific state and federal requirements. Used oil filters. Used oil filters must be drained of all free liquids prior to disposal. The department recommends that used oil filters be punctured or crushed prior to disposal. Petroleum contaminated wastes. Large quantities of soils and debris contaminated with petroleum are prohibited unless the facility is permitted under the provisions of the Solid Waste Rules, Chapter 8, Section 5. Petroleum-contaminated soils should be screened, treated, and disposed in accordance with an approved permit or Guideline Number 2, Petroleum-Contaminated Soils. PCB wastes. Electrical transformers in soils contaminated with PCBs are prohibited unless specific written authorization from the department is obtained. This is an example of a PCB transformer that has a label designating that it does contain PCBs. This is an example of a PCB capacitor. This is an example of a PCB capacitor. Tires. Whole tires may be stockpiled at a landfill for the purpose of shredding or recycling. Storage of more than 5,000 tires must be permitted by the department. If disposed of whole, tires should be placed at the bottom of the trench and covered with broken concrete or asphalt to prevent them from floating up. Asbestos. Non-friable asbestos can be disposed at permitted landfills, provided that the wastes are covered immediately with a minimum of 6 inches of cover material prior to compaction and in a manner which minimizes an increase in the friability of any exposed edges. Friable asbestos is prohibited unless the facility is permitted under the provisions of the Solid Waste Rules, Chapter 8, Section 4. See Guideline number 5 concerning the identification of friable and non-friable asbestos. White goods containing CFCs, or chlorofluorocarbons. If it can be documented that the CFCs have been removed from the white good, refrigerator, freezer, or air conditioner, it can be stockpiled for recycling or crushed and disposed. If the CFCs have not been removed from the white good, it must be rejected or stockpiled in a separate area for removal of CFCs at a later date. Note, if the white good is rejected, the operator should offer to damage the door or latch system so that it does not pose an entrapment hazard to children. Liquid wastes. Household quantities of liquids, 5 gallons or less, must be placed in a sealed container and should be mixed with absorbent material before disposal. Bulk quantities of liquids, more than 5 gallons, may not be disposed in a landfill. Note, many household liquids can be discharged to public sanitary sewer systems if proper precautions are taken. For additional information, contact the department or the local wastewater treatment plant operator. Ballasts. Fluorescent light tubes containing mercury may exhibit hazardous waste characteristics. These wastes may be accepted for disposal from households or CESQGs only. Fluorescent light ballasts manufactured before 1979 may contain small quantities of PCBs. These wastes should not be disposed at state landfills, but disposed at a permitted PCB disposal site. Infectious or red bag waste. Infectious waste from hospitals, medical clinics, mortuaries, healthcare units, dental offices, etc. should not be accepted unless containerized in a properly labeled red bag and properly treated. Sharps, needles, syringes, scalpels should be placed in rigid containers with lids. For example, 5-gallon plastic buckets or plastic milk jugs. Note, if possible, the department recommends that all red bag waste be autoclaved or incinerated by the generator prior to disposal. Car wash sumps. Car wash sumps may be accepted without any special testing. See Guideline number 8, Testing and Disposal of Sump Waste for more information. Car wash sumps must pass the paint filter liquids test unless the landfill has a permitted drying disposal area. Questions or comments on this guideline or this guidance should be directed to the Solid and Hazardous Waste Division staff at the following locations. Please be advised the procedures and guidelines contained in this training for screening hazardous waste and prohibited waste are only recommendations from the department. Other methods may be submitted to the department for consideration and approval. The following publication is available for review at all Solid and Hazardous Waste Division offices.